In order to achieve great things with little money, the Pakistani car owner directly customized an oversized container. Although the empty truck is already overloaded at this time, this is only the limit of the truck, not the limit of the owner. In order to install this large container, the imported Jifang truck purchased by the master at this time only needs to arrange the slot bars on the truck beam, and then they will install the crossbeam on the top. In order to improve the firmness of the container, the spacing between these crossbeams is still controlled relatively tightly. During the installation process, the masters use rolls of paper to measure the spacing and use cotton thread for reference to ensure that there is no deviation between the positions of each crossbeam. For example, the fixing method of the beam at the bottom of the container and the truck beam. This removable riding bolt is used. This fixing method can reduce the hardness between the beams. The installation of the bottom of the carriage is completed by their collective operation. Then the masters need to use a small hammer to correct the beams with inconsistent curvature. After ensuring that there is no problem, they can splice the bottom steel plate. These bottom plates are all made by them in advance. It is relatively easy to splice. The entire chassis is spliced with only 8 steel plates. The length of this carriage must have exceeded 9 meters. The fixing method of the steel plate and the chassis must be inseparable from electric welding. The masters consumed 2 packs of welding rods with their superb welding skills. The chassis of the carriage was finally completed. The next thing to make is the blue plates on both sides of the carriage. Because these steel plates are made by bending in sections, in order to assemble them into a whole, the masters need to arrange them on the chassis of the carriage in order before splicing them. This process is complicated, but it is not simple at all. They only need to control the curvature between the steel plates to ensure the firmness of the welding at the splicing. In order to improve the firmness, they will also weld square tubes on the top and use square tubes to limit the steel plates to prevent the curvature of the steel plates from deviating. During installation, a crane is needed for assistance. The master skillfully uses the steel plates to adjust the spacing and performs detailed welding through electric welding. The whole process is relatively simple. We only need to ensure that there is no problem with the curvature of the carriage. Then use electric welding to weld carefully. It's not too fast. After an hour of welding, this side is spliced very quickly. Then you can splice the other side. The splicing method here is basically the same as the previous one. After the 2 experienced masters spliced carefully, the steel plate was spliced quickly. Then you can weld on the top and measure the blue plate in front. At this time, there is a rough framework. They only need to assemble the steel plates and then use electric welding to improve the overall firmness of the carriage. They will use a tape measure to measure the welding of the upper channel steel. For the sake of beauty, the masters only need to arrange and install the steel plate on the top of the rear carriage. In order to prevent the carriage from raining heavily outside and light rain on the outside, the masters must be very meticulous in the installation process. After the entire carriage is spliced, electric welding can be used for the final finishing process. These splicing places require the masters to use electric welding. It takes more than a dozen packs of welding rods to make such a carriage. In order to improve the aesthetics of the outside of the carriage, the masters will scrape and apply putty at the joints. In order to improve the plasticity of the joints, several experienced masters will apply putty at the joints. The joints on the outside are quickly scraped and painted through the operation of the head and face. Then the anti-rust primer can be sprayed to improve the overall anti-rustability of the carriage. After the primer is sprayed, it needs to be dried for a day. For the sake of beauty, the outside is also sprayed with color paint. During this spraying process, after the master's meticulous operation, the entire container compartment is sprayed very quickly. At this time, this large container has been made by them for another 5 days. Now it has finally been made. What do you think of the master's production process? If there are 10 points, how many points are you willing to give?